Congratulations on making it to the end of this section of the Complete Android Developer course. In this final video, we'll be creating a basic phrases app. So as I mentioned in the previous video, we're going to set up a grid layout demo, much like we did there. And then very simply, our app is going to contain a number of basic phrases in a non-English language. And when the appropriate button is pressed, then that will play the phrase. So you can either use that as a tool when you go on holiday or as a learning tool to practice your basic phrases. In order to get these phrases, I went to ielanguages.com, and my app is going to be in French, but you can use any of these languages here, and they've got some brilliant free MP3s that you can download and use in your app. So if you want to create a custom app, then that's great. If you just want to use the phrases that I've created, just go to androiddevcourse.com/phrases.zip and then download that to your desktop, and then you'll see the basic phrases that I've extracted from the MP3s on the ielanguages.com site. So it's a pretty simple app, but there are a few subtleties to it. I would definitely recommend that you do it yourself. You might then want to, just the last bit of my video, if you've been happy with the rest of it. One thing we really want to avoid is having 8 different methods created, one for each button, and then running separately. So you need to find a way, ideally, to avoid that and have a single method which works out which button has been pressed and then plays the appropriate sound. But I'll leave you to try and figure that out. Obviously, if you can't, don't worry about it. Just watch my video and I'll show you how I solve the problem. Best of luck. Okay, here we go then. I'm going to start with a new project. I'll call it Basic Phrases. And then all the usual options there. And we're going to be copying the basic phrases into the app as well. So I'm going to start with that. We'll do that in the usual way by creating a new folder within Res, or a new directory called raw. And then I'm just going to command click or right click and reveal in Finder. And there's the Res folder. Within it should be a raw folder. There we go. And then I can take my phrases and just drag those in. There we go. That'll obviously work slightly different in Windows, but it's basically the same process. We're just dragging in our files, our audio files, into the raw folder. Okay. Sometimes if you shrink it and then enlarge it again, there we go. So there's our phrases. That's step 1 done. Step 2 now is to add our grid view. So this is going to be exactly the same process. Sorry, our grid layout, slightly different to a grid view. And now let's add our buttons. Or we'll start with just the one anyway. There we go. So let's do this fairly carefully. Jump over to the text view. So this one is going to say hello. So we'll change the text to hello. And then we'll just add all of the settings that we had last time. So Android layout column is 0. Android layout row, is 0 as well. Android column weight is 0. Android layout row weight. Sorry, those weights should be 1. And then Android layout gravity is fill. So that's the big one, which makes it fill the whole grid view. And then I'm going to change the ID to match the name of the file. And that's going to be important because later on I'm going to use the ID to tell our phone which file to play. So that's my kind of clue, as it were, for how I'm going to set this up so that it knows which file to play. Okay, so now we just need to add another 7 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that was 7. So I'll do this as quickly as possible. We'll change this to a column of 1. We'll make this one, how are you? I apologize in advance to any French speakers who I've translated these wrong for, but I think they're basically right. So that becomes how are you? And then we have row of 1, column 0. This one will be good evening. And then 1, 1. This one can be please. It's quite nice. You can see the app taking shape to the right as we're adding our code here. Sorry, column 0, row 2. My name is. Row 2, column 1. Do you speak English? We're nearly there now. Row 3, column 0. Welcome. And looks like I did miss one off after all. So this last one will be I live in. Okay, here we go. You can see that it's stretched out a little because of the Do You Speak English button there. If we wanted to, we can add in a special symbol, which is essentially an HTML symbol, which is an ampersand and then a hash and then a 10 and a semicolon, which is just the HTML code for a line break. And then you can see we get the line break in there, and that looks a bit better, I think, rather than stretching all of these buttons to match that longer one there. So that's how you change your buttons to have more than one line. All right, and so now we've added all our buttons. You might want to change the color or do something a bit more fancy to them, but I'm just going to leave them like that. So now we want to start getting responses when these individual buttons are tapped. Now we could go back through design mode and click on them one by one and add an on click to each of them, but that's not particularly efficient. Much quicker would be to add it in the XML. So Android on click. Here's button tapped. And I'm just going to add that to all of them. So notice that I'm adding a single method here. A perfectly valid solution to this problem would be to add a different method for each button, but that's not particularly scalable. We'll be creating endless methods if we had lots and lots of different buttons here. And we might even want to, at some point, fill these buttons programmatically rather than hard coding them in like we have here. And then we wouldn't be able to create, again, endless different methods on the fly. So we're going to learn how to do it a slightly neater way. So now we need to set up our button tapped method over in mainActivity.java. So as usual, public void button tapped, and it's going to be called by a view which we'll call view. And for now, I'm just going to log button tapped true, just to make sure that everything looks okay and that everything's connected up. What we're going to want soon after this is to work out which button was tapped. And that's a slightly trickier problem to solve, but we'll get there. So I'll just type, there we go. So that's connected up nicely. Now, if we just type in view here, so remember this view is the button that's been tapped on. I can actually use a method called getID, which looks like it will be pretty perfect, and that would give me the ID of the button. But then we get a mysterious error here that this is actually an integer, an int. So we're going to need to convert it to a string to be able to display it in the logs. So we'll use integer.toString. And then let's run that. There's definitely something strange going on because the IDs that we entered were not integers, they were very much strings. But let's see what happens then when we run the app now. So button tapped, and then you can see we get this big long number that obviously we haven't entered at all. So what is actually going on there is that this ID is a number within the app itself, which it used to refer to this button, but it's not the same ID that we actually gave the button, which is slightly confusing, but we can still use it to get what we want. So let's see how we do that. First of all, let's just create an integer called ID, which is going to be equal to the ID of the button that's just been tapped. When I say ID there, I mean this long number, not the ID that we entered for it. Then we'll create a string, which we'll call our ID, which initially is going to be empty. And then we're going to attempt to find our ID of the element that has been tapped, so the button that's been tapped. And if we can, we'll set it to our ID. And then we use view.getResourceEntryName and then ID. And that will give us the ID for the object which we want to set to our ID. So now let's give that a try. This should be a string, so we don't need to convert it. So we can just display it straight away. So this essentially gets into the resources and gets information about the object that was tapped on, and we can use that to get the particular ID. That is the one that we entered for the button. Let's just bring that up. Fantastic. There we go. So I live in, welcome, do you speak English, etc. Brilliant. So now we've got the ID. It's just a matter of playing the sound, which in theory is simple, but we're going to get a little complication here. Let's just set it up as we would normally do. So we'll create a media player variable, which we'll call again mPlayer. And normally we would use mediaplayer.create, and then we would use this for the context, and then we'd use something like r.raw.say do you speak English, and then we'd use mplayer.start. The complication here, of course, is that we don't know which file we should play, and we can't just replace this with the our ID string, because this is not a string, this is a particular object within r.raw. But don't panic, there is a way around it. What we can do is get yet another ID for this particular resource, for the resource that we want to play. And we can get that using int resource ID. So we're creating an integer called resource ID, which is going to be an integer that we can reuse to refer to one of these sound files. And we get that using get resources dot get identifier, and then we enter our ID, which is the identifier of the particular file, the location of it, so it's going to be in raw, and then we need to specify the package name. We use this command to get identifiers from other packages, and the easiest way to get the package name is just to bring up the logs, and it's that string there. So com.example. For me, Rob Percival, dot basic phrases. Obviously, it's very important you get that right. And then, instead of using r.raw to refer to a particular file, we can just use resource ID, which tells us what's going on there and how this is stored within the Android system. So when we type r.raw.hello, that's actually returning an integer, and that's one of those long integers that we saw, which refers to an object or a file within the app, in this case the hello.m4a file. Alright, so fingers crossed, if we've done everything right, this should play the correct sound when the button is tapped. There we go.
Ça va? S'il vous plaît. Bonsoir.
Fantastic.
Je m'appelle... Tu parles anglais? Bienvenue. J'habite à...
And that's it. So the complications really were not so much around the layout or the buttons, they were just around this getting resource IDs, etc. But if you do things this way, it can save a lot of creating 8 different methods, having to assign the same method to each individual button, for example. So that's it. Feel free to play around with this app and make it even more exciting and useful. And then when you've done that, take a quick break and let's get straight on with section 5.